Billionaire leaves his safe open to trap his black maid, but her reaction left him in tears, crying, "Welcome to Tales by Orion. Let's uncover what really happened." The city was a sprawling tapestry of steel and glass, and from his penthouse on the 92nd floor, Alistair Finch could see every thread. He saw the rivers of headlights flowing through concrete canyons, the distant glow of stadiums, the pinprick lights of airplanes tracing invisible paths across the bruised twilight sky. He had purchased this view, this dominion over the horizon, for a sum that could have funded a small nation for a year. Yet all he felt was a profound, unbreachable isolation. The silence in his home was not peaceful. It was a vacuum, polished and sterile, echoing the emptiness that had taken root in his soul since his wife Martha had passed. He was surrounded by objects of immense value, a Rothko on one wall, a Giacometti sculpture in the hall, but they were cold companions. They demanded nothing and gave back only their own immutable, expensive silence. It was people he no longer trusted. His life had been a long, bitter education in the corrosive power of wealth. He'd seen loyalty curdle into sycophancy, love reveal itself as a transaction, and friendship become a thinly veiled negotiation. Now in his late 60s, he was a king on a mountain of gold, convinced that every hand extended to him was secretly reaching for his pockets. This corrosive cynicism had recently fixated on a new subject, Eleanor Vance. She had been his maid for 6 months, hired by a service, a ghost in a simple gray uniform who drifted through his vast apartment 3 days a week. She was a woman of indeterminate age, somewhere between 50 and 60, he guessed, with a quiet dignity that was both unnerving and intriguing. Unlike the fawning staff at his company, or the cloying relatives who called on holidays, Eleanor was still. She spoke only when necessary, her voice calm and low. Her movements were economical and graceful, erasing dust and disorder, with a practiced efficiency that left no trace of her own presence, save for the immaculate order she left behind. He would sometimes watch her on the security monitors he had installed throughout the penthouse, a habit born of paranoia. He watched her straighten a crooked picture frame, her touch gentle. He watched her pause to look at a photograph of Martha on the mantelpiece, her expression not nosy, but softly empathetic, as if she were acknowledging a shared space of loss. He watched her meticulously water the orchid in the foyer, a plant his expensive florists had given up on, coaxing a new pearlescent bloom from its stem. These small acts should have been reassuring, but to Alistair's poisoned mind, they were simply a more sophisticated performance. She was playing a role, he concluded, the role of the humble, trustworthy servant. It was a long game, perhaps, but the game was always the same. Everyone had a price. He just hadn't discovered hers yet. And so, a cruel, ugly idea began to form. It was more than an idea, it was a compulsion. He needed to prove it. He needed to shatter that serene composure and see the raw, universal greed he knew was hiding underneath. The proof would be a bitter pill, but it would affirm his understanding of the world, a worldview that had become the bedrock of his lonely existence. He would set a trap, not with wires and springs, but with human nature itself. The following Tuesday, Alistair put his plan into motion. The stage was his private study, a room paneled in dark mahogany, smelling of old leather and paper. It was his inner sanctum, a place no one but he and, for cleaning, Eleanor, ever entered. At the heart of the room, behind a painting of a stormy seascape, was a state-of-the-art titanium safe. It held documents, a few pieces of Martha's jewelry he couldn't bear to look at, and a substantial amount of emergency cash. He swung the seascape outward, revealing the brushed metal door. He entered the code, the tumblers clicking with satisfying precision. The heavy door hissed open. He didn't take anything out. Instead, he made a small, deliberate adjustment. He pulled out 5 thick bundles of $100 bills, $50,000, and placed them right at the front, impossible to miss. Then he did the most important part. He didn't close the door. He left it slightly ajar, a dark, tempting slit in the wall of his fortress. It was a blatant invitation, a test of character, so obvious it felt almost vulgar. He then went to find Eleanor, who was quietly polishing the granite countertops in the kitchen. "Eleanor," he said, his voice artificially casual, "I have to go out for the day, an unexpected meeting. I'd like you to do a deep clean of the study today. Dust the books, polish the desk, everything. Take your time. I won't be back until late this evening." He watched her face for a flicker of anything, curiosity, avarice, calculation. He saw nothing but polite acknowledgement. "Yes, Mr. Finch." she said, her eyes meeting his for a brief, clear moment. "I'll see to it." He nodded, turned, and walked out, the lie heavy on his tongue. He wasn't going to a meeting. He was going to a small, anonymous cafe, 3 blocks away, where he would sit with a cup of bitter coffee and watch a live feed from a tiny camera hidden in a bookshelf, pointed directly at the safe. The anticipation was a cold, hard knot in his stomach. He was the architect of a drama he was certain he knew the ending to, and he felt a grim, miserable satisfaction. The quiet, dignified Maid was about to be unmasked. Eleanor Vance moved through the silent penthouse with a rhythm born of long practice. Her work was a form of meditation, a way to bring order to a small corner of a chaotic world. She did not envy Mr. Finch his wealth. She pitied him his solitude. She saw the signs of it everywhere: the untouched guest rooms, the single-place setting at the vast dining table, the way his eyes seemed to look past people rather than at them. He was a man adrift in a sea of his own possessions, and she felt a distant, professional sorrow for him. Her own life was small, but it was anchored. Her tiny, meticulously kept apartment was a world away from this gilded cage. It was filled not with expensive art, but with books from the public library, a canary that sang in the mornings, and the lingering, cherished memory of her husband, a good man who had taught her that a person's worth was measured by their word, not their wallet. These were the thoughts that occupied her mind as she gathered her supplies and headed towards the study. Mr. Finch had been strange this morning, his voice tight, his gaze intense. She hoped he was all right. The study was her favorite room to clean. It felt like the heart of the house, the only space that seemed truly lived in. She loved the smell of the books and the way the morning light filtered through the massive window. She began her routine, dusting the shelves from top to bottom, her cloth moving gently over the spines of leather-bound classics. She worked her way around the room, saving the large mahogany desk for last. As she moved past the wall with the seascape painting, she stopped. The painting was swung out from the wall, and behind it the thick metallic door of the safe was open. It wasn't just open, it was a gaping wound in the wall's integrity, a dark slice of shadow that immediately felt wrong, discordant in the otherwise perfect room. Eleanor froze, her hand still holding the dustcloth. Her first thought was not of opportunity, but of alarm. An image of a break-in, of a shadowy figure fleeing, flashed through her mind. But the rest of the apartment was pristine, the alarm system active. No, this was something else. She took a hesitant step closer, her heart beginning to beat a little faster. She peered into the gap, and she saw it. Stacks of money, neatly bound, sitting on the top shelf in plain view. It was more money than she had ever seen in one place. A fortune just sitting there, unguarded. A wave of dizziness washed over her. For a fleeting second, the sheer possibility of it, the weight of what it could do, pay off her mortgage, fix her sister's leaking roof, ensure she would never have to worry again, was a tangible physical pressure. It was a fantasy, a daydream that lasted no longer than a single deep breath, because it was immediately overwhelmed by a far more powerful feeling, a cold, professional dread. This was a violation, a terrible oversight. Mr. Finch, in his distraction and loneliness, had made a grave mistake. Her mind raced with the implications. If she left it, what if someone else found it? A delivery person, a repairman. The blame could easily fall on her. She was the one who was supposed to be in the room. The thought sent a chill down her spine. Her reputation, her integrity, was the only real currency she possessed. She couldn't touch the money. That was unthinkable. It felt like poison, but she couldn't just walk away and pretend she hadn't seen it. That would be a dereliction of her duty, not just as an employee, but as a decent human being. In the downtown cafe, Alistair stared at his phone, his coffee forgotten. He watched her approach the safe. He saw her freeze. This was it, the moment of truth. He leaned closer, his breath held tight in his chest. He could see the conflict on the screen, a microdrama playing out on her face. He saw the initial shock, the flicker of something he interpreted as calculation. He saw her glance towards the door of the study, as if checking to see if she was truly alone. Here it comes, he thought, a wave of bitter vindication washing over him. She'll take one stack, just one. She'll think I'll never miss it. He was ready to feel the familiar sting of disappointment, the confirmation of his bleakest beliefs. It was a feeling he was comfortable with, a cynical armor he had worn for decades. But then, he watched as Eleanor did something he had not factored into any of his cynical equations. He saw her expression shift from shock to something else entirely. Deep, furrowed concern. She wasn't looking at the money with greed, but at the open safe with a kind of protective anxiety. It was the same look she gave his wilting orchid. She took a deep, steadying breath, her shoulders squaring with resolve. She reached out, but her hand went not to the stacks of cash, but to the cold, heavy edge of the titanium door. Using both hands, she pushed it firmly. Alistair heard the faint metallic thud through the phone's tiny speaker as it clicked shut, the seal engaging. The temptation was gone, locked away by her own hand. Alistair stared, dumbfounded. He felt a crack appear in the icy certainty that encased his heart. But what she did next was what truly shattered it. Eleanor turned to the cleaning cart she had wheeled into the room. From a small caddy, she retrieved a pad of yellow sticky notes and a pen she kept for leaving messages about supplies. She paused for a moment, thinking, then bent over the desk and wrote. Her handwriting was neat and clear, the script of a person who took care in all things, small and large. Alistair zoomed in on the phone screen, trying to read the words as she wrote them. When she was finished, she peeled the small yellow square from the pad and walked back to the wall. She pressed it firmly onto the seascape painting that now concealed the sealed safe. Then, without a second glance, she returned to her work, picking up her cloth and beginning to polish the mahogany desk as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened at all. In the cafe, Alistair felt as though the air had been punched from his lungs. He rewound the footage, his thumb trembling slightly on the screen. He watched the entire sequence again, her worried expression, her decisive protective action of closing the door, and the note. He zoomed in as far as the phone's camera would allow, the pixels blurring slightly, but the words were still legible. Sir, it read, I found this open, and took the liberty of securing it for you. I hope all is well, Eleanor. I hope all is well. It was those 5 words that undid him. It was not a note of fear, or a note of someone covering their tracks. It was a note of genuine human concern. She hadn't seen a temptation, she had seen a sign of distress. She had responded not with greed, but with care. A hot, unfamiliar shame washed over Alistair, so potent it made him nauseous. He had designed a test for her character, but in reality, he had only constructed a mirror for the ugliness of his own. The trap he had set for her had instead sprung on him, catching him in the sharp, brutal teeth of his own cynicism. He looked around the anonymous cafe, at the strangers laughing and talking, and felt a profound sense of dislocation. The world he had so carefully constructed, a world populated by schemers and opportunists, had just been proven false by the quiet, simple integrity of his maid. Alistair sat frozen for a long time, the bustling cafe fading into a dull roar around him. He played the video a third time, a fourth. Each viewing was a fresh wave of self-recrimination. He saw not a potential thief, but a woman of quiet strength. A woman who, when faced with a fortune, chose to protect the well-being of a man who had viewed her with nothing but suspicion. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest. He abruptly stood up, threw a $50 bill on the table for a $3 coffee, and walked out into the harsh afternoon light. He didn't walk, he strode, driven by a new, urgent need, not to confront, but to understand, to apologize. He arrived back at the penthouse in record time, his heart hammering against his ribs. He let himself in, the silence of the apartment no longer feeling empty, but accusatory. He found Eleanor in the main living area. She was on her knees, carefully cleaning the base of the Giacometti sculpture, her movements as meticulous as ever. She looked up, surprised to see him. Mr. Finch, I thought you weren't returning until this evening. Her voice was calm, betraying nothing. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He just looked at her, this woman he had so profoundly misjudged. Eleanor, he finally managed, his voice hoarse. Would you please come to the study for a moment? A flicker of worry crossed her face, perhaps thinking she was in some kind of trouble. Of course, sir. She rose gracefully and followed him down the hall. He walked into the study and went straight to the painting, pulling it aside to reveal the yellow note still stuck to its surface. He peeled it off, holding the small square of paper in his hand as if it were a precious artifact. He turned to face her. I owe you an apology, he began, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. A profound one. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to meet her clear, questioning gaze. The safe, I left it open, on purpose. It was a test, Eleanor, a disgusting, vile test of your character. He saw a flash of hurt in her eyes, quickly masked by her ingrained composure. He pressed on, the confession tumbling out of him, fueled by weeks of lonely paranoia and years of curdling distrust. I've become convinced that everyone is motivated by greed. That kindness is just a mask for self-interest. I wanted to prove myself right. I set a trap for you." He looked down at the note in his hand, then back up at her. His carefully constructed facade, the one he presented to the world as an unassailable titan of industry, was crumbling. His eyes, for the first time in years, began to burn with unshed tears. "I sat in a cafe, and I watched you on a hidden camera. I watched you find it, and I waited for you to take something." His voice broke, a raw, ragged sound in the quiet room. "But you didn't. You closed it. You protected me. You were worried about me." A single tear escaped, and traced a hot path down his cheek. He didn't bother to wipe it away. "I wanted to expose your character," he whispered, the full crushing weight of his actions finally landing on him. "But all I did was reveal the complete and utter poverty of my own." He wasn't just crying from shame. He was crying from a strange, painful, and overwhelming sense of relief. Someone, finally, had proven him wrong. The world wasn't as dark as he had made it. Eleanor stood silently, absorbing his confession. There was no "I told you so" in her posture, no anger in her eyes. There was only a deep, bottomless well of empathy. She saw not a billionaire tycoon, but a lonely, frightened old man who had barricaded himself behind his money until he could no longer see the good in anything. When he finished, the room was thick with his ragged breaths. She finally spoke, her voice as gentle as the touch she used on his wilting orchid. "We all have our tests, Mr. Finch," she said softly. "Most are not of our own making." She paused, then decided to offer a small piece of herself, a gift of vulnerability to match his own. "When my husband passed," she began, "he left me with a great deal of debt, the hospital bills. I had nothing. I took a job cleaning for a small family bakery. The owner, Mrs. Gable, she was an old woman, sharp as a tack. On my first day, she left the cash drawer open while she went to the back. It wasn't a test like yours. It was just trust. She trusted me. That trust, Mr. Finch, was worth more than any amount of money in that drawer. It made me feel rich." The simple story hung in the air, a powerful counterpoint to Alistair's cynical experiment. It reframed the entire event, not as a matter of catching a thief, but of offering faith. At that precise moment, the penthouse door buzzed. Alistair, startled, looked at the monitor by the door. "It's my nephew, Marcus," he sighed, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Let him in, I suppose." A minute later, Marcus breezed in, all expensive cologne and smug confidence. He saw his uncle standing with Eleanor and smirked. "Uncle Alistair, getting financial advice from the help now?" he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Be careful she doesn't polish off the family silver." Before, Alistair might have let the comment slide. But today something had fundamentally shifted. He turned on Marcus, his voice low and cold with a newfound fire. "Get out," he said. Marcus blinked, shocked. "What?" "Eleanor Vance," Alistair said, his voice ringing with absolute conviction, "has more integrity, more character, and more damn value in her little finger than you have in your entire body. You are not welcome in this house while you think it's acceptable to speak to another human being that way. Now get out." Marcus stood, his jaw slack, before turning and storming out. Alistair turned back to Eleanor, his chest heaving slightly. For the first time, he had defended not his money, but a person's honor, and it felt like the most valuable transaction he had ever made. The incident with the safe and the subsequent dismissal of his nephew became a fault line in Alistair's life, separating everything that came before from everything that came after. His relationship with Eleanor transformed entirely. She was no longer just the maid. She became his confidante, his advisor, his moral compass. He would ask her to sit with him in the afternoons. Over a cup of tea she would prepare, and they would simply talk. He asked about her life, her husband, the books she read. He found in her a quiet wisdom and a grounded perspective that he had starved himself of for decades. He told her about his business, the soulless world of acquisitions and leveraged buyouts, and she would listen patiently, her simple questions often cutting through the complexity to the human core of the matter. "But is that fair to the workers?" she might ask. "Or will that actually make people's lives better?" These were questions his board of directors never posed. His shame slowly transmuted into a powerful desire for redemption. He realized with sickening clarity that he had spent his life accumulating wealth, but had failed to accumulate any real meaning. "I want to do something good, Eleanor," he confessed one afternoon, staring out at the city that now looked less like a kingdom and more like a field of unanswered needs. "All this, it has to be for something more than just this." He decided to start a charitable foundation, Not a vanity project for tax purposes, but a real, working entity, dedicated to tangible change. His lawyers and accountants drew up the papers. But when it came to forming the board, he made a request that stunned them all. He wanted Eleanor Vance to have a seat. His legal team balked. "Sir, with all due respect, she's your housekeeper. The board needs experts, financiers, people with influence." Alistair looked at them with his newly cleared eyes. "I have enough of those," he said calmly. "What I need is goodness. I need a reminder of what we're actually working for," he insisted. And Eleanor, after much humble protest, finally agreed. The Finch Foundation was born, and its first board meeting was a study in contrasts. It was held in a sterile, glass-walled conference room downtown. Around the polished table sat three of Alistair's most powerful business associates, all sharp suits and sharper smiles, and Alistair himself. And then there was Eleanor, in a simple but dignified navy blue dress she'd bought for the occasion. She was quiet for the first hour as the men threw around terms like strategic endowment, scalable impact metrics, and leveraging assets. They proposed funding a new wing for a modern art museum and sponsoring a yacht race, projects that would get their names on plaques. Alistair watched Eleanor, saw the respectful but slightly lost look on her face. Finally, he turned to her. "Eleanor," he said, cutting off a discussion about tax-efficient disbursement vehicles. "You've been very quiet. What do you think we should do?" All eyes turned to her. A flush rose on her cheeks, but she sat up straight. "Well, Mr. Finch," she began, her voice soft but clear. "Where I live, the local library branch closed down 2 years ago. The children in my building, they have nowhere to go after school to do their homework. The older people, they have nowhere to read a newspaper or use a computer to talk to their families." She looked down at her hands, then back up. "I know it's not a grand thing like a museum, but a library is a warm, safe place. It's a place where anyone, with no money at all, can find a whole world. It's a place that tells a community that they matter." The room was silent. The financiers exchanged glances, one almost rolling his eyes. But Alistair was captivated. He saw it instantly. It wasn't grand. It was essential. It wasn't about him. It was about people. "That," Alistair announced to the stunned room, "is our first project. We're not just reopening that library, Eleanor. We're going to build the best damn library that neighborhood has ever seen." The ripple effect of that single act of integrity in the study had begun to spread, and it was about to change an entire community. The project became Alistair's obsession and Eleanor's passion. He poured resources into it, but more importantly, he poured himself into it. He was on site every day, trading his bespoke suits for work boots, conferring with architects and contractors. But he made no major decisions without Eleanor. She wasn't just a symbolic presence. She was the soul of the project. She advised on the layout, insisting on a large, brightly lit children's section, with comfortable chairs and low tables. She fought for a dedicated literacy program for adults, a computer lab with free classes for seniors, and a small sunny garden out back with benches. She spoke with people from the neighborhood, with mothers, with teenagers, with the elderly, gathering their hopes and needs and translating them into the blueprint. She had a voice, and for the first time in her life, people with the power to enact change were listening. The transformation in Alistair was just as profound. The cynical, isolated billionaire was gone. In his place was an engaged, energetic man with a purpose. He learned the names of the construction workers. He ate lunch with them from a food truck. He laughed. The lines of suspicion around his eyes softened into lines of contentment. He was building something that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet, and it was the most valuable work of his life. The grand opening of the Eleanor Vance Community Library was on a bright Saturday in autumn. The whole neighborhood turned out. The street was closed off, and there was a feeling of celebration in the air, a sense of collective ownership and pride. Children with painted faces ran through the new garden, their laughter echoing off the library's warm brick facade. Inside, teenagers were already exploring the graphic novel section, and older residents were marveling at the bank of new computers. Eleanor walked through the crowd, not as a guest of honor, but as one of them. People stopped her, hugged her, thanked her. "My son has a safe place to study now," one mother told her, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." An elderly man grasped her hand. "I can finally email my granddaughter in Australia," he said with a wide grin. These were the beneficiaries, the living, breathing proof of the ripple effect. Their gratitude was a current of pure, unadulterated joy. Alistair stood on a small stage erected in front of the library's entrance. He looked out at the sea of happy faces, his own face beaming. He saw Eleanor standing quietly near the back, a small proud smile on her face. When he spoke, his voice was full of a warmth no one had ever heard from him before. "They say a person's true wealth is not what they have, but what they give," he began. "For most of my life I believed wealth was something you locked away in a safe. I was wrong." He looked directly at Eleanor, his gaze unwavering. "I learned from a very wise woman that the greatest treasures are not gold or cash, but integrity, kindness, and trust. This library is a testament to that truth. It is named after Eleanor Vance, but it is a gift from her spirit to us all." The crowd erupted in applause, turning to find Eleanor, who simply blushed and nodded, her heart full to bursting. Later, as the sun began to set, Alistair found her sitting on a bench in the new garden, watching the children play. He sat down beside her. For a long while, they said nothing, just sharing the peaceful, contented silence. "You know," Alistair said softly, "that day in the study, I thought I had lost everything that mattered. It turns out, it was the day I started to find it. What is the true measure of a person's worth? Is it found in the assets they accumulate, the power they wield, or the fortress of security they build around themselves? We spend so much of our lives protecting what we own, barricading our possessions behind walls of steel and suspicion. We become dragons, guarding hoards of treasure in lonely caves, forgetting that the point of light is not to be contained, but to be shared." The story of Alistair and Eleanor reminds us that the most profound tests of character rarely come with a warning. They arrive in quiet, ordinary moments: an open door, a moment of trust, a choice between what is easy and what is right. We may believe we are judging others, weighing their integrity in the balance, when in reality, the scales are measuring our own soul, our own capacity for faith in our fellow human beings. Perhaps true wealth isn't something we can lock in a safe. Perhaps it's the courage to leave the door to our heart unlocked, just a little, to trust that the quiet dignity and hidden goodness in others is more common than our cynicism allows us to believe. The greatest treasures are not hidden in vaults. They are hidden in plain sight, in the unassuming people who walk among us every day, carrying within them a quiet integrity that, if we are only open enough to see it, has the power to change not only our own lives, but the world.